In this day and age, a special edition controller largely means very little. They might be a different colour or maybe have a game's logo slapped onto the plastic somewhere, but they're functionally standardised. Several wild and wacky limited releases of days gone by that were hard to find then are practically impossible to locate now. But if you somehow have one of these in your collection, then rejoice, you have a piece of gaming history. From strange shapes to bizarre button layouts, the gamepads on this list all tried something different. I'm Si for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 rare and valuable video game controllers you might own. Number 10. WU-TANG SHAOLIN Style Pad. Now and then throughout video game history, celebrities have tried their hand at expanding the value of their brand by looking at interactive entertainment. Actors, sports stars, and musicians have all crossed the Rubicon into the world of video games to varying results. Wu-Tang Clan, one of the 90s most successful rap groups, tried their own attempts with the PS1 fighting game Shaolin Style. Reviews of the title range from middling to pretty positive, especially as it did its best to celebrate the musician's identity in its soundtrack and, of course, in its specialist controller. Stylized on the group's logo, the Wu-Tang Shaolin Style controller is one of the most unique silhouettes for a gamepad you'll ever see. Whilst many musicians have put their likeness to video game software, few can say they've done the same for hardware. With the game launching in '99, however, this controller was already outdated, as its lack of sticks and vibration made it far lesser than the new and rather revolutionary DualShock. Also, as cool as the shape was, it wasn't exactly a comfortable piece of plastic to be holding onto. Maybe not one to particularly use then, this rare controller is more of a collector's item than the best way to play. Number 9. Elemental GEARBOLT Assassin's Case. Elemental GEARBOLT is a decent but ultimately forgotten light gun shooter for PlayStation, developed by Alpha Studios and published by Sony. A very special limited edition of the game was made to celebrate its release, and the word limited is very operative, with a best guess of 40 being produced. One was awarded to the winner of a tournament held at CES in 1998, and the rest largely went to publications and journalists. The complete package was something special, housed in an aluminium case with special coloured memory cards, and of course the reason it made it to this list, a unique controller. The Elemental GEARBOLT gun isn't unique from a specifications point of view, in fact it's just a regular Namco gun con of the era. However, it's the golden sheen that the whole thing has, something that would get Francisco Scaramanga excited. This vacuum metalized peripheral even has matching golden screws, giving it a pretty stellar look. As only 40 were made, it makes it exceptionally rare, but considering most were sent out to publications, it's possible that every now and then a new listing will appear on eBay from the special few in the industry clearing out their collections. So if your Namco gun con happens to be gold, you might be sitting on a severely rare controller. Number 8. Nijicon. The name of this controller comes from the Japanese word nijiru, which is to twist, so that should give you an idea of this gamepad's intended purpose. Split into two, the halves are built around a swivel, so that each can be pushed and pulled forwards and backwards. The Nijicon was inspired by the 1997 title Cyber Sled and was designed to imitate its arcade experience at home, but there's way more to it than meets the eye. Compatible with a large chunk of racing games on the PlayStation system, from the wacky sci-fi thrills of Wipeout to the fairly straightforward and realistic Gran Turismo, it was perhaps the best way to play these kinds of titles. Before the advent of the DualShock, Nijicon pretty much invented analog control. By twisting the portions, you had infinitely more precision over your vehicle's turning compared to the standard D-pad. Plus, even some of the face buttons had analog control due to their length and depth, and you could choose how much gas or brake to apply. It might look like a weird toy now, but the Nijicon was actually very popular at the time of its release. Ultimately, however, when thumbsticks became the norm, this quirky little experiment got lost to time. Number 7. GameCube Keyboard Controller. The Sega Dreamcast is largely regarded as a colossal disaster. That being said, the saving grace is that its impact it had on the gaming industry is perhaps even greater than its failure. Being the first games console with internet connectivity, Sega could only look at PCs for inspiration, and thus peripherals like the Dreamcast mouse and keyboard were a requirement for online surfing and gaming. When Phantasy Star Online, Sega's online RPG, released on GameCube sometime later, hardware developer ASCII returned to Sega's keyboard idea. The GameCube keyboard controller is exactly what it sounds like, the two halves of a GameCube controller bolted onto the sides of a keyboard. It's like that moment in cartoons where a character eats an entire sandwich whole and you see it move horizontally down their neck. Just pick your keyboard up into the air and imagine playing with a controller that wide. It's certainly not the most comfortable thought, and having to place it down to type a message and then pick it back up again over and over seems ultimately dreadful. On top of this, the rare few who managed to use the controller have complained that the keys were too small and typing on the thing wasn't that easy, which sort of negates its entire point. Number 6. Resident Evil Pad. Around the release of Resident Evil 4, Capcom put out 2 different coloured special edition controllers for the title that were modelled on chainsaws. They were weird and wonderful, even if they were kind of awkward to use. Even the game they were designed for was a little cumbersome to play with them. Before that though, around 1998, ASCII released an official Resident Evil controller that was very specifically designed to enhance your survival horror experiences. Most important feature about the Resident Evil Pad was reshuffling the standard PlayStation button layout so the most important things are in immediate reach, and those that you don't need, often the shoulder buttons, are kept out of the way. Thus, rather strangely, the face buttons are square, triangle, circle, and R1, which raises the character's weapon. The X button is now on the back, as a trigger, set into one of the controller's arms that are designed to look like pistol grips. Capcom were all about experimentation in the late 90s and early 2000s, so it's no big surprise they signed off on this, but whilst it's a neat piece of history, its changes are rather minimal and therefore it's easily forgotten. Still, it's a fun novelty, as controllers released to work for one specific franchise were very much a rarity in this era. Number 5. Intel Wireless Series Gamepad. Let's at least first give credit where credit is due, as the Intel Wireless Series Gamepad's biggest selling point is obvious and in its name. Released in the year 2000, it's the first mass-produced game controller that didn't have any cables. This was preceding the coming turn in the industry, where this would grow to be the standard. That being said, it was designed for the PC, a system where you're typically seated right in front of the screen, so that immediately makes it less impactful than had it suddenly cleared the cables from your TV to your sofa that your mum kept complaining were in the way. To make matters worse, it was extremely hard to set up at the best of times and required a specific sensor to connect to, as this was long before the age of widespread wireless and Bluetooth. And, as you'd all expect, this was sold separately, because of course it was. Looking at its bizarre shape, even after going to all those lengths to set it up, the Intel Wireless Series Gamepad doesn't look remotely comfortable to operate, with its bulbous plastic loop that makes it resemble a travel pillow more than a game controller. And considering it's made from hardened plastic, it's probably not good for that either. Number 4. Katana, the Soul Controller. We've all used a big plastic gun controller of some kind, whether that's at home or in the arcade, but have you used a big plastic sword? Hori, the company that produced this quite frankly bizarre peripheral, had 20 years of experience in hardware in Japan before they started producing for the worldwide market. What an incredibly Japanese statement to make with your first international product. Katana, the Soul Controller, is one of the few controllers that could be counted as a legitimate weapon. Stylized on the traditional Japanese sword of old, the Katana controller is 2 pieces of plastic that slot together to make the PlayStation 2's strangest peripheral. It was designed with Onimusha 3 in mind, which is why it got Capcom's blessing as a licensed product. That being said, whether you play it with this game or any other PlayStation title, you'll be in for a strange and indeed challenging time. Because of the nature of the shape, to say the layout of the controls is strange is putting it delicately. All of the buttons are on one end, with the sticks and D-pad a little further down. Thus, your hands may find themselves sliding up and down the handle of the katana pretty regularly, making it look less like you're using it to swing a sword, and more like, well, I'm sure you can figure that one out. Number 3. SEGA Fishing Rod. As previously mentioned, the Dreamcast had plenty of issues that led to its demise. One of these was not a lack of ideas though, and in fact, considering that the system was only on the market for a couple of years, it did a hell of a lot with the time it had. Keyboards and mice are all fine, and light guns are old hat. What about something a little more relaxing? There is a strangely high number of fishing games for the Sega Dreamcast, and the reason why perhaps is trying to increase the roster of truly compatible games for the console's very original fishing rod peripheral. Surprisingly comfortable to hold and very straightforward to use, the controller has a winder for reeling in fish, a gyroscope for pulling back, and the necessary buttons and control stick on its face. Whilst it was packaged with Sega Bass Fishing, this weird contraption can be used to varying degrees on many other Dreamcast titles. Ever wanted to win a game of Virtua Tennis with a fishing rod? Well, with this little plastic friend, you can absolutely do that. Unfortunately, the Sega Fishing Rod wasn't usable with Sonic Adventure, so it cannot fix the awful fishing stages featuring Big the Cat, but with 6 fishing titles already on the system, you'll be spoilt for choice anyway. Number 2. Steel Battalion. When Xbox came along, every Tom, Dick and Harry got their jokes in about Microsoft trying to make PC games work on home console, pointing at the apparent failure of Dreamcast's keyboard peripherals and so on. Whilst the Xbox obviously did a great job of becoming a console rather than a miniature PC, there was one game that needed a lot more buttons than were on the standard controller. Steel Battalion was only playable if you had its huge control unit, and I use the word unit in the sense that this guy is a unit. 34 buttons, 2 joysticks and 3 floor pedals, Steel Battalion's gameplay was all about learning and mastering such a complex control system. It was an attempt to make the game's bipedal tanks feel super realistic, on top of the already hyper-real gameplay that included deleting your save data if you died. Yes, really. You better figure out how these 3 dozen buttons operate fast, soldier, or you'll be playing that first mission over and over. Upon release, the controller actually sold out, and subsequent production runs changed the green buttons to blue. Either way, if you've got a Steel Battalion setup, then you're the envy of the Xbox faithful, especially if it's that super rare first edition. Number 1. Hands-free NES controller. A rather important feature in video games that is gladly on the rise is a consideration for accessibility. After all, gaming is a massive industry and beloved pastime of millions, and it should be something that as many people as possible can enjoy. Whilst we've still got some way to go, huge props have to be given to Nintendo for being way ahead of the curve. Released 30 years ago for the Nintendo Entertainment System, this hands-free controller was designed for players lacking the ability to use their hands. Mounting to the chest and neck, the key part of this controller is a kind of straw. The player breathes into it to press A and sucks out to press B. Alongside this is a rod that sits on the player's neck or chin that can be moved up, down, left and right. Unlike some controllers that are designed to make a game feel more fluid to play or more immersive, this is a rare example of a controller that makes games simply more accessible to people who otherwise would never have had the chance to play the likes of Super Mario Bros. For themselves. Today it's considered one of the rarest pieces of NES kit, and considering how, in a way, it was so cutting edge, collectors should clutch this piece of gaming history tight. And that's the list. Let us know in the comments below what you thought of this video and if you own any of these rare controllers. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.